When we talk about plants, it's really easy to think of the plants that we're familiar with. Large trees, bushes, flowers. But it turns out that we're going to see a lot of unity and diversity in plant form, or how plants are constructed. So, a few things to get us started. The first is going to be the idea of how are plants unified. So plants are all going to be eukaryotic. They're all going to be multicellular. They are all autotrophic with a chloroplast. And they all have a cell wall made of cellulose. And so those are kind of some characteristics that all plants have in common. And that's kind of what groups this kingdom together. And you should have done a drawing, and if you didn't, at least go look at the drawing, of the phylogenetic tree of plants, meaning the evolutionary relationships. There are really going to be four main categories of plants. The first one is one that you might often overlook, which is mosses. And those are going to be called non-vascular plants. Then we're going to see ferns, and those are vascular but seedless. And we see gymnosperms, which store their seeds in a cone, and angiosperms, which make a flower and store their seed in a fruit. So we're going to kind of talk about those along the way. What we want to start with first is the idea of what really is the most basic form of a plant. What makes an organism a plant? It turns out that the plant's body is actually determined by a region called a meristem. A meristem is going to be a region of increased cell division. And so while we see in animals that we can have cell division in lots of different, originating from lots of different areas, in plants, the majority of your growth is going to occur at regions called meristems. So they grow from the top up, they grow from the bottom down, and they actually grow from the inside to the outside. Now, we don't have to know the idea of the apical meristems and the lateral meristems, but you do need to know that in a plant, there are lots of different regions of cell growth. These cells will grow into three main organs, so we are going to see a lot of cell differentiation, and that is where we're really going to focus today. The idea that a plant is not just a collection of cells. If we go back to green algae appears to be multicellular, but those cells don't collaborate, they don't work together, and they're not differentiated. All of those cells are the same. So a true determination of a true plant is that we do have cell differentiation. The three main organs are going to be leaves and stems. That's what everybody thinks of first if I ask you to draw a picture of a plant. But we can't forget the roots. The roots are going to have lots of really important jobs. If we talk just about the main jobs, leaves are really going to be for photosynthesis. Stems are really going to be for support and transport. Roots are really there to anchor the plant and to begin the movement of water by absorbing water. When we look at the growth of a plant, again, we are going to see cell division, and this is going to be mostly mitosis. We will see meiosis, because it turns out that another feature of plants, along with these four, is that they do reproduce sexually. So we are going to see meiosis, we are going to make gametes, we're going to make haploid cells, and they have to come together. Keep in mind, sexual reproduction means we're going to end up with a lot more variation. So we do see a lot of variety in plants. The idea of unity and diversity. You don't necessarily need to be able to explain the apical and lateral meristem, just the idea that there are regions of cell division in plants. What happens to these cells is as they differentiate, they become tissues, and those tissues will be found in each of the 3 organs. So inside of a leaf, I'll see dermal tissue, ground tissue, and vascular tissue. Now dermal, this word might make sense to you if you know the epidermis. This is mainly going to be the outer layer. And these cells are going to have adaptations. Keep in mind, adaptations, adaptive value, help you survive. They're going to have adaptations specifically for that region. So we'll look at the leaf a little bit lower at the end of the notes, and we'll see some adaptations of dermal tissue that are in leaves, but we don't see those same adaptations in roots. Next we have ground tissue, and this is really going to be kind of space filling. It's kind of like connective tissue in animals. It's the idea that this is what really holds the body of the plant together. Keep in mind they don't have a skeleton, so they do need to rely on the idea of the cell wall. And we'll see this word called lignified. That means that they've given extra support even beyond that. And then we have vascular tissue, and this is actually going to be really important. Vascular tissue is, think of the word cardiovascular. Vascular has to do with transport. So inside of a plant, we have specialized cells called xylem cells, and they are going to be dead and hollow at maturity. And they are going to transport water. And so you do need to know the direction that water is transported from the roots up to the leaves. We started a transpiration lab the other day. And all of this is about transporting through the body of the plant. Then we have cells called phloem, and these are going to be live at maturity. They're also going to have support cells. So think back to the nerve cell, the Schwann cell that sends a signal. The nerve cell sends a signal and the Schwann cell is wrapped around it to help support it. Turns out plant cells have similar supportive structures around part of their conducting tissue. So nerve cells are going to conduct electrical impulses to send a message, versus phloem cells, these are actually transporting food. And so if you think of the pH for food, another way to remember it is xylem up, phloem down, or a river flows down. The food or the sugars are being transported from the leaves to anywhere else in the body of the plant. Keep in mind, if we're looking at the roots of the plant, they get no sun. So there is no photosynthesis going on here, no light-dependent reactions, no Calvin cycle. That is not happening in the roots. So the leaves and part of the stem are responsible for doing the photosynthesis and then sending those sugars or building blocks, because we might use it to build cellulose, we might use it to build starch. If I'm a potato, what I'm actually doing is collecting energy from the sun, using the electron's energy to create a hydrogen ion gradient, using that hydrogen ion gradient to produce ATP, I'm also using that electron that I harvested from water to create NADPH, the electron carrier, and ATP and NADPH will then be used to fix carbon dioxide during the Calvin cycle. But that doesn't happen in the roots. And so what we have to pay attention to is this idea of differentiated cells. We will see xylem and phloem in every part of the plant because it needs to be able to transport from the bottom of the root all the way up to the top of the tree. We're going to start by actually looking at root structure and function. We already said that they're here to absorb water and anchor the plant. So increased surface area is a huge theme that we see in the roots. And you might have actually seen it when you started your plants for the plant lab that we're doing. The root has a few really important adaptations. The first is a root cap, and this is a region with actually mucus to help move And we have to be careful with what we mean move. Really, we mean as it divides, it will push deeper into the soil as dividing. And so the root is actually the area of the highest rate of cell division. It turns out that the roots are constantly growing, constantly seeking out deeper parts of the earth to try to find water. So we're going to see a really high amount of cell division in this region. And we also see this protective cap down here that will help protect the cells behind it. So the meristem is actually right here behind the root cap. We're going to have a zone of cell division. This is where the meristem is. Then there's a zone of elongation, and this is where the cell is going to elongate as the cell wall softens a little to allow that elongation. The cytoplasm will expand. And then we see maturation, which is also known as differentiation. And this is where we're going to start seeing cells take on certain jobs. One of the most important jobs is labeled here as number 1, and it is the root hair. The root hair is an extension of the root to increase the surface area and therefore increase water absorption. 2 other quick features that we want to talk about: the Casparian strip and modified roots. The Casparian strip is going to be a waxy layer to direct water to the xylem. So once the water enters the root, we need it to get to the xylem. And modified roots, we have storage. So if you think about a carrot, we're going to be able to store starch down below the ground to actually hide it from animals. The plant does not want the animal to eat that. We'll talk later about why the plant might want some animals to eat other parts. Real quickly, we're just going to talk about the idea of the stem. The stem, we already said, is for support, but we are going to see transport happening. So we do see the vascular tissue. It turns out that there are a huge variety of different plants. You're not expected to know monocot or dicot anymore. The one thing I want to kind of add in there is just the idea of tendrils. Tendrils are going to be very flexible stems. And these are going to be seen in vines. And so these are going to be seen in plants that actually have found a different way to get closer to the sun. Some plants are going to invest a lot of energy building cork, which is basically bark, which is basically dead cells. So they have to grow the cells, kill the cells for that support, so they're dead at maturity, but it takes a lot of energy to do that. And so time, and so some plants have actually found a unique way around that, an adaptation. Keep in mind they didn't find it. There was a genetic mutation. Where we actually want to focus a little bit more is on the leaf structure and function. Keep in mind that this is really all about photosynthesis. So all of the structures are there to maximize photosynthesis. We will see some modified leaves as spines for protection or needles. We'll see changes in the surface area. So some plants are going to have really large leaves. Some plants are going to actually have very small leaves, and we'll talk about why a little later. But the general structure of a leaf is what we want to talk about. When we look at a leaf, there are a few things that we need to know. We do need to know that the epidermis is going to have a cuticle, but this cuticle needs to be clear so the light can still get through it, and this is for protection. Then we have the palisade and the spongy parenchyma. This is where photosynthesis is going to happen. The idea of spongy is actually that there are spaces for gas to be stored. We do have our stoma and stomata. The stoma is actually the pore, and the cell, the guard cell, is actually what is going to regulate the stomata. We need to go back and think about what the stomata does. It actually regulates whether that pore is open or closed. And then you do want to identify the vein is the same thing as the xylem and phloem or vascular bundle. So we want to take a little time to review the Stomata, most important.